All right. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Al Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Friday. It's a free-for-all, and I hope I hear from you. I got some real positive feedback from various folks about yesterday's program, and I, again, want to thank Ed Kelly for coming on board. Obviously, a man with very different political views than I have and a very different view about Charlie Kirk. So I really appreciate his graciousness coming on. I know he was very upset with what I posted in the aftermath of the report that Kirk had been murdered. And, he was very upset. I understand why. I understand the rhetoric I used was inappropriate at best. And I pulled it back. I censored myself. Now, some folks don't like it. I've gotten criticism from various people on the Halitics page. Some of it I leave up, depending on how personal it is. Personal insults, denigration, I'm not going to allow up there. I want to have a back and forth. But people say, hey, you should leave stuff up. Don't pull it off and, whatever. That I will leave. And you can debate it. You can say this is what you said, what have you, within reason. I'm going to certainly allow that back and forth. I think that's appropriate. But I do censor other material if it's personal attacks on especially non-public. Now, if you personally attack a public figure, you get a lot more leeway, right? You go after Trump, you go after Hillary, as I often do. You get a lot more leeway than if you go after some rando individual. There's no question about that. But there's even limits there. I'm going to pull stuff out. And I was very close, actually, to what's post about Trump. And I was thinking about whether, the pedophile stuff, it hasn't really been confirmed, but there's enough there with the drawing and all that I'm not going to pull that stuff if you go after Trump in that regard, even if you claim things that certainly haven't been, proven. I'm not going to necessarily pull stuff like that. So we'll go through that a little bit, not so much today. I'm going to start, and by the way, again, if you want to join me, 240-242-5646, would love to hear from you. I do want to ask you, if you haven't yet done so, please click subscribe now, bottom right. Want to get those numbers. I always say that, want to get those numbers up. We're sort of slouching towards not Bethlehem as, well, not Joyce Carol Oates, whoever wrote Run River, I forget her name, she wrote slouching towards Bethlehem as well. Very good writer. Anyway, we're not slouching towards Bethlehem. We're slouching maybe towards 400. And obviously that's not nearly enough. I mean, I was hoping for 1,000 in my first year. Didn't get there. But we will at some point. It's just a long, hard slog. All right, 240-242-5646, as I mentioned, 240-242-5646. By the way, hey, Ari, good to see you there in the chat. And got to remember who wrote that, Slouching Towards Bethlehem. I can even see the book and Run River. And she wrote about California. It was her big thing. She's from Sacramento. Anyway, great writer. But now I can't remember her name. I think her husband's a writer, too. Look, an error has been recorded, but unfortunately, you didn't see it. From Anadolu, John C., death toll exceeds now 64,750, the latest from Gaza, from Palestine. It's just horrific. It always is. Death numbers a little lower than we've seen in recent days. Not sure quite why that is. 38 killed in the last 24 hours, according to the health ministry there in Gaza. And we have aid seekers, famine deaths now reaching 413 as Israel continues its murderous war on the people of Palestine. Just absolutely horrific story. We will always be on top of it. Maybe don't give it as much focus as some would like, but there are other places, obviously, on the internet. Maybe not corporate media, but on the internet where you can, credible sources, obviously Al Jazeera is credible. We've seen that Wafa, the Palestinian news agency, is credible. Anadolu Ajansi, the Turkish news agency, is credible. Now, I don't know if I would go to the Turkish news agency if I wanted to get the lowdown on Erdogan and what he does to his political enemies. I'm sure they would be reluctant to publish that, if they would publish anything at all that was critical of the Turkish president. But when it comes to what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Israel. We have seen that these Arab and Middle Eastern news sources are very reliable time after time. We have now a death count. I come to 64,756 with the 38 added from yesterday and today. And let's see, from March 18, it says to September 5. I got to correct that. Maybe I should have changed that to today. So it's already to September 12. Trump and Netanyahu have killed approximately 12,200 Gazans, including likely over 6,000 women and children. So absolutely horrific, as always, from Gaza. And I wish we didn't have to go there. I've said, I'm not a reflexive, let's put it that way, I'm not a reflexive Trump hater, anti-Trump. In many ways, I think he's been an absolutely awful president, abysmal. But, when he first took office, there was that hope, that glimmer, that maybe the killing fields in Gaza would not see even more Palestinian bodies. And for a little bit of time that happened, and then it didn't. So, it is what it is. All right, for the free-for-all, we're going to talk a lot about the Charlie Kirk situation. He was killed Wednesday, and we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about it. And now there's more news, right? There's been an actual shooter arrested, right? The shooter has been arrested. The man that the man that's believed responsible has been arrested for the murder. And I want to just start with that because a lot of what will follow on today's program will relate to that specific story. And specifically the identity of this murderer, what we do know about him, what we don't know about him, and what people have said or speculated or presumed about the killer, even long before he was actually arrested, and before anyone knew his name or who he was. And of course, we don't know. We don't know that Tyler Robinson is the murderer, but it does seem quite likely. Apparently, his family turned him in. They had seen a picture of, there was a picture taken at the scene, and it was distributed. He lives in the region. He was somebody who was familiar with firearms, with the kind of rifle that was used. Seems pretty clear that Tyler Robinson, killed Charlie Kirk. So what do we know? What do we know about him? Well, 22 years old. He's from the city of St. George, Utah. I don't think that's where Utah State is. I'm not really sure. This was on the campus of Utah State. Apparently, Robinson is a bright, at least test results, did well in his ACTs, did quite well, as a matter of fact. Now, I guess Utah State is in St. George, right? A 22-year-old man who attended school in the South Utah city of St. George was named the suspected shooter. He has no criminal history and is not affiliated with any political party. So the argument, so the presumption by many, especially on the right, the presumption that he came from the opposite political side, at least that we heard from the right, where they were all saying this is what liberals do, this is what lefties do, this is what Democrats do. They kill people, they kill righties. It's a war by them against us. That very, very aggressive rhetoric, I would call it violent rhetoric, generating exactly what they claim they're against, right? That they're saying, hey, we're the victims, you're using horrible rhetoric against us. Well, at least at this point, we don't have reason to believe that Tyler Robinson was some kind of a leftist or affiliated with some sort of liberal or left-wing group. In fact, the speculation I've seen on internet with, I guess, some evidence behind it is that maybe, just maybe, he was actually a right-winger, or at least affiliated with some right-wing groups, had been previously conservative. Certainly St. George, Utah is a very conservative region of the state, even much less than the country. So We don't really know. I don't want to speculate. But at this point, the idea that Tyler Robinson, the suspected and arrested shooter, Trump said we got him, was motivated by some type of partisan political animus towards conservative Charlie Kirk, that does not seem to be borne out by the facts as we know them now. Of course, it could change. Maybe he was radicalized. Maybe he was, who knows, in some hotbed of radicalism in Provo. I don't really know. We don't know. But to this moment, to speculate that he is a violent, murderous Democrat is just simply not justified by the facts, which is that he didn't even have a political affiliate. He was not affiliated with a party. Now, I'm going to respond right now in some detail to this video or GIF or meme, I don't know what you want to call it, that was posted on Halitics. And I'm not going to play the GIF because I found it very offensive. It's there. I didn't pull it because it didn't make any political, it didn't attack the video itself, and the posting doesn't go after anyone individually who's a member of Halitics or, otherwise, in my view, scurrilous or unfair criticism. So I left it, of course. But I just show you I show you the front of it. Guns, or the first frame, right? Guns don't murder people, Democrats do. So that's the claim. And in the video, there's all this angry rhetoric against various Democrats, people I don't particularly have any affection towards. Barack Obama. I think Kamala Harris may be mentioned. I don't even remember. Hakeem Jeffries, I think, is definitely mentioned. I believe his name is misspelled in there. So a bunch of Democrats, many I dislike, and their rhetoric supposedly is responsible, calling Trump a fascist. Have they said that? Hakeem Jeffries just sort of has taken a very backseat approach towards Trump. When Trump came into office, there's a picture of Barack Obama giving him like a hearty handshake and a smile. So I haven't heard this violent, aggressive rhetoric from standard issue Democrats whatsoever. Yes, I've seen people like Robert Reich and Tom Hartman absolutely have called Trump a fascist, but that's not who the video attributes this to. It's the video poster, the creator, I guess, the content creator doesn't say Robert Reich and Tom Hartman are to blame. It's these Democrats, these identified Democrats like Obama. Well, I think that's kind of absurd. I really do. There's no justification for it. But that's the claim. I went to the website, right, because we hear this over and over. Democrats are more violent. The liberals, that's what we hear on the right. Now, and that was this a speculation that this shooter would be some kind of crazed liberal. And I couldn't believe, to be honest with you folks, I could not believe that, by the way, hey, Khalid, got a new poster in our chat with Ari. Khalid, unknown fact, he only knows why he did such inhumane act. I guess he's talking about the shooter. All right, so I believe, I was really surprised that the National Institute of Justice, the Justice Department, has this up. This was posted in 2024. And I'm going to guess it's going to be taken down. In fact, when I went back to this site, I had seen this post yesterday and I marked it, but I didn't download it at that point. And I went back this morning, and for a moment I was thinking, I hope it's still there. The Trump administration might well have pulled it, because the government research, the conclusions, the analysis by the U.S. government directly contravenes, as we'll see, what Trump and what the right wing is saying about domestic violence, about terrorism. So what does it say? What are the actual facts on the ground? Militant, nationalistic, white supremacist, violent extremism has increased in the U.S. This is from 1990. Remember, this is a 2024 analysis. In fact, the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violence extremism. So in the United States, most violent attacks that are terroristic in nature, that are politically motivated, come from the right. Since 1990, 1990, last millennium, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist extremists. This includes 227 events that took more than 520 lives. I guess if you want to throw 9/11 in there, it would mess up all of this, because certainly it would seem as though radical Islam attacked us on 9/11. So I don't know whether they're not including it, or that's in terms of the total number of deaths by extremists. It's higher for Islamists if you're going to include 9/11. But in terms of the total number of events, far more events by right-wing, far-right extremists. And I don't know if they are going to include 9/11, because those were not Americans. They weren't homegrown. They weren't domestic in any way, obviously. It was really an attack on our nation. So during the same period, far-left extremists committed only 42 versus 227 ideologically motivated attacks that took 78 lives. So, I don't know, 6 or 7 times as many people have been killed by radical right-wing extremists than by left-wing extremists since 1990. And a recent threat assessment by the Department of Homeland Security concluded that domestic violent extremists, so that's what we're talking about, not foreign, domestic violent extremists are an acute threat, and highlighted a probability that COVID-19 pandemic-related stressors, long-standing ideological grievances related to immigration, and narratives surrounding electoral fraud will continue to serve as a justification for violent action. So that's from the right. Simple fact. That's more likely. You're more likely, if you're a victim of domestic political terror, domestic political violence in this country, you're much more likely to have been killed by a far-right extremist than by a far-left extremist or by a radical Islamist. It's just that simple. Now, that said, we don't know. We don't know. Even Charlie Kirk, who I would say, not in terms of his demeanor, I wouldn't call him far-right, but in terms of his actual policies, what he proposed, what he called for, was far-right. Even though the target, the victim in this case, Kirk, was to the right, we have no reason at this point to conclude, or even to suspect, really, that his shooter, his killer, his assassin, was from the left. We know that most political violence in America is on the right, comes from the right. It's not arguable. And that assessment by the Department of Justice came long after the Black Lives Matter movement. We had, yesterday, Ed was, I thought, a great guest, and I really hope he'll come back. I don't know, maybe he won't, but we'll see. But he made the point, I thought it was a very good one, that when you're making conclusions about, various situations, various circumstances, and he brought up global warming. Well, maybe it's been getting warmer for the past 30 years, but it depends on what time frame you look at. Maybe the past 5 years, it hasn't been getting warmer. And I agree with that. You have to be very careful about the data, what sources for sure, but also what's the time frame. Is there a time frame that's excluded that changes everything? And maybe, but in this case, the time frame is 1990 to 24. So where's the evidence, if any, that suddenly there's this upsurge in left-wing violence? We just don't have it. And we did see right-wing violence. The attack on the Capitol was a right-wing attack on on July 7th. Was it July 6th? What was it? January 6th. January 6th. Come on, Hal. January 6th. That was a right-wing attack. Now, fortunately, they didn't kill anybody. I know there was all this, well, there was a cop who died and this and that. It was after the fact. I don't want to get into, but it was still a, violent attack on our Capitol. And I'm glad nobody was killed, and it could have been a lot worse. And I don't make more of this than a lot of people do, but still there was violence. So I'm not going to buy, when the claim that somehow the left is more violent than the right, or even that it's almost as violent, or it's half as violent. It's much less. The left is far less violent than the right. It's just that simple. Now, of course, Trump is, now if you disagree, please, show me the receipts. Where's the facts? Not just Charlie Kirk was killed and he's right, so therefore it was the left that did it. Except that's not what we even, as far as we know, and we don't know a lot, that he wasn't killed by a crazy left-winger. That's not what happened. As far as we know at this point. Facts, we learn new facts. Obviously, you'll hear about them here. Trump is lying about political violence. There's really, I like that headline in a way because they don't mince words. His story about the left and the right doesn't hold up to facts. It seems clear that's true. So what exactly is Trump saying? And we just saw it. Most political violence in this country comes from the right, not the left. And by the way, that's a long-standing fact, right? I mean, if you look at lynching, the terrible violence against almost all lynching victims from the end of the Civil War up until the 1960s, almost all of the victims of lynching were black. There were some white victims, but very few. Mob violence. And there were hundreds, maybe thousands. I'm not sure how many victims of lynching were black, but I think there were thousands who were killed by mobs. And most or almost none of most of them, if not all of those violent perpetrators got away with it. Not all of them. I mean, the Klan was prosecuted. And so there are examples where lynchers were brought to justice, but rarely. So that's political violence, right? You don't get to vote. If you try to vote, we're going to kill you. You raise your head in the public square. You look at somebody funny. We think we'll kill you. If you don't maintain an incredibly submissive attitude, we'll kill you. Well, that's political violence. It's violence that's beyond just targeting one person, but to say to the people in that group, you have to do what we tell you all the time, without exception. That's political violence. Violence in this country, political violence, has generally been on the right, has come from the right, has come from reactionaries, come from people who are trying to maintain their privileges. Now, I would say often they were very misguided. I mean, besides just being wrong, being evil, more immoral, they were often very misguided. There are lynchers who came from poor white, backgrounds. They were not doing well. They were their efforts to keep black people down didn't redound to their benefit. So even if they were purely acting under their own misguided notions of what was in their best interest, they were wrong. Doesn't always work out. But political violence for the perp even. But political violence is generally, not invariably, but is generally, the province of the right. So what is Trump saying? Radical left political violence has kept too many innocent people, has hurt too many innocent people and taken too many lives. He doesn't provide any evidence. I guess he's assuming. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. It's kind of rhetoric. So he's very upset about rhetoric. Rhetoric is the killer, according to him. And we're seeing in our country, we must stop right now, that rhetoric that he doesn't like. Well, let's look at the rhetoric, because the rhetoric that I saw was mostly from the right. The really ugly, violent rhetoric that we can decry comes from the right side of the aisle. So let's look at this. Let's look at that violent rhetoric that's without, justification. Shortly after Kirk was shot, Musk posts, "The left is the party of murder." Well, first of all, the left is not a party. There's the Democratic Party. I guess there's the Democratic Socialists. It's not a party. I don't know what he means by the left. The Democrat Party isn't even a left party. It's a corporate party. So I don't know who's this party he's claiming is the party of murder, but he's clearly using very aggressive rhetoric that's designed to justify retaliation. According to Fox News' Jesse Waters, they, whoever they are at war with us, whether we want to accept it or not. So he said, this is what you saw from Israel, right? Well, Hamas attacked us. Palestine, Gaza attacked us. So they're at war with us. We can do anything we want. They started it. They brought it on themselves. We're going to unleash hell. That's what you're seeing on the right. Not a response of, hey, we're better than that. We've got to all step back. Let's take a pause here. Let's figure out what's really behind all this violence in America. Why are people so angry? Why are people willing to take guns and kill each other? What's behind all this? How can we reduce it? We're not saying we're going to forgive. We're not saying we're going to, excuse it. But what's going on here? Now, I got criticized because there was a murder, I think in Charlotte, North Carolina, a woman from Ukraine was murdered on a subway or on a public transit bus, I guess was a bus, by a violent man who apparently was a schizophrenic. So we know that people are being released too soon, right? I mean, we look at this, we look at a murder like that. We say, okay, what's behind this? Why are we seeing violence on public transit? What can we do to protect people so it doesn't happen? Again, do we need more cops? Do we need to have more placements, more beds for people who who ideate violently? And I would say yes, we need to address those problems. Are we going to? No, but that's what we need to do. The response to Kirk's murder is similarly not, hey, what's going on here? Why are these crimes occurring? How can we reduce the incidence of them? Well, one way obviously would be to be much more aggressive about common sense gun controls. Why are people, why do people have access to these very high-powered weapons where you can shoot somebody? Apparently, you don't even have to be a particularly good shot because the scopes are so accurate and they're so powerful that there's very little deflection even after the whatever. I don't even understand. There's very little wind movement, very little deflection because the bullet goes so quickly to its target. And what I've also heard, I don't know if this is true, is that bullet did not strike Kirk's neck first. It actually struck, and I watched the video, I'm not going to show it, but it looks to me, I don't know if this is true, it appears that it struck him in the chest, which is where the shooter would have aimed, presumably. Not the neck, which is, harder to hit than the chest. And apparently Kirk was apparently wearing some sort of armor, body armor. But the bullet was fired with such power, the rifle generated so much velocity that even after deflecting off of his breastplate, the vest's chest plate, it still, instantly killed him. It's horrible. It's a horrible thing. It's an awful thing that happened. Trump is concerned about rhetoric, though, right? That it's the rhetoric that causes this, not the bullet, not the rifle. the rhetoric I'm seeing is incredibly violent on the right. The last time the radical left orchestrated a wave of violence and terror, said Christopher Rufo, Edgar Hoover shut it down. We must infiltrate, disrupt, arrest, and incarcerate all who are responsible for this chaos. I don't know who those all are. Obviously, you arrest the person who pulls the trigger, but people are, desperate, anxious, angry. We have overheated rhetoric. We have people on the internet who say crazy things. I feel very bad. I contributed to that. I described Kirk in a way that I think is defensible, but at the wrong time in the wrong place. And I certainly hurt my credibility with certain people, and I'm sorry about that. So there's a lot of factors at play. But that kind of overheated rhetoric by me or others is very, very problematic. And it's what leads to, I believe, these types of terrible incidents. Now, before we get into, I'm going to do more on Kirk, but I have problems with Kirk, as you know. I mean, I mince no words about it. I'm not familiar, wasn't familiar with him. He's not somebody that I spend a lot of time ever thinking about. By the way, nice to see music in there. Not sure what scat. Loved the show. Just thought that was funny. Classic Scat Tower. Appreciate the kind words, music. Thank you so much. Michael Tracy shared a good piece from Greenwald on Twitter about private and public death etiquette with regard to public political figures. Okay, I'll check Tracy out. Sometimes I like him, sometimes I don't. I have look, my whole shtick here, why I do this is I want to bring people together from different political perspective, with different political views, different political perspectives, to join together to solve problems I think beset all of us. I think we all, despite our political differences, I think we have more in common. Yesterday when I had on a real I think he's a real conservative, seems to be a real Charlie Kirk guy. Ed, he loves his kid, takes care of him, loves his wife. They are together. They're a family. They're doing the best they can for themselves. That's how I like to see myself. I think most of us are good-hearted. I think we want to work together regardless of our politics. I don't want to demonize, and I don't demonize voters. I do go after political people. I do go after powerful, wealthy individuals who I believe abuse their privileges. I feel like that's what's wrong with our society, is that a small cadre use their wealth and power to maintain their privileges, to take what little the rest of us have away from us. And I think Charlie Kirk was part of that. I think he manipulated people's legitimate anger and resentment in an unjust society where things are getting worse. I think he took advantage of people's fears and steered them in the wrong direction. I feel that strongly, and that is why I have a lot of anger towards Kirk. And personally, I have anger from a different perspective, which is, hey, in some ways, as Ed pointed out, he and I are, share a similar space, I guess. Although obviously he's far more, he's influential. I was going to say he's far more influential than I'm. All right, he's a gazillion times more influential. I was going to say he's influential and I'm not. I won't say that. He's got a gazillion times more influence than I have. That's the case. But we're both in some ways trying to do the same thing. And I do have a resentment that a message that I think is not based, to use that word. By the way, 6,500 racial terror lynchings of black people between 1865 and 1950. So I said there were with thousands more likely to have occurred. So I said thousands, and it was actually the numbers was higher, was definitely higher than I thought. So, but back to, but that violence against black people was designed. People say, well, it was designed. The function was to ensure white supremacy, and I would argue that was not the function of the lynchings. The lynchings were the function was designed to ensure elite supremacy, to ensure that the planter class, the wealthiest, the landowners, that their dominance was assured, and they pitted poor whites, working class whites, against black people. Now, I'm not excusing the poor whites and the working class whites from having engaged in those terrible crimes over that period. No, they're guilty. You're guilty for what you do. What I'm saying is that the societal function was to keep two groups that were unempowered, that did not have power, one that had no power, one that had little power, to keep them at each other's throats, to pit them against each other so that they wouldn't unite against the whatever billionaires. They weren't really billionaires, but whatever they were, the elites. And in Alabama, the wealthiest, I believe, were either called the big mules or the big donkeys, depending on, time frame. But those people, the people who had 1,000-acre plantations, who had many, after slavery period, many of their slaves became sharecroppers, right? And there were white sharecroppers too, but they would have some privileges, for example, that the blacks wouldn't have. So that was what we saw. And I believe what Kirk's role and what he was extremely well compensated for was, again, to pit different groups of people who aren't privileged against each other, or to maintain for groups that have some privileges, those privileges on the backs of even those with less, so that they wouldn't unite and demand true equal justice. I have a huge problem with that. One evidence I present for that, I'm going to play some video clips. Also, why I think Kirk was popular, what he said or did that people really, not with me, but that resonated. I think all of this is really relevant. We need to really look into all of this. One reason I would say, that what Kirk did was extremely congenial to the billionaire class, that I think, I view them as the, and look, again, I mean, it's maybe some would think it's rich coming from me. I don't hide it. I'm privileged myself. I'm not anywhere near a billionaire, but I'm economically secure, which in America is increasingly tragically rare. Here's a billionaire finance guy, Bill Ackman. I feel incredibly privileged to have spent a day and shared a meal with Kirk this summer. He was a giant of a man. So obviously, Charlie Kirk was love, his act, what he did, and Turning Points USA was apparently incredibly powerful. I did not know this. Campus chapters everywhere. He was, drew big crowds with his little debates. His debates where he would have people ask him questions, and he would try to, I guess, present his view. And I have a lot of issues with the way he did that. We'll show it in a little bit. But, Ackman clearly viewed Kirk as an ally. He was an ally. He was an asset for the billionaire class. Trump calls him a wonderful American. Kirk helped elect Trump. Kirk went to college campuses. Kids are usually to the left. Usually would vote Democrat. We didn't see that in this last election. There are a lot of reasons. I blame the Democrats for first and foremost. I don't think Charlie Kirk would have found fertile ground on college campuses around this country College kids didn't face a very uncertain, unless they're from affluent families. I know college students or, former college students with huge debt. College kids are facing a very uncertain future. And Charlie Kirk presented them with an answer, an explanation. Democrats have failed to do that. Now, I would say the explanation is massive college debt is a big problem, obviously. Makes it a harder job, a very challenging job market, a society that doesn't create good middle-class jobs anymore. These are issues that we need as a society to address. And we won't. We don't. We're not going to. The Democrats won't. Certainly the Republicans won't. What Charlie Kirk did is say, well, hey, the real problem is those immigrants who don't belong here. The real problem, we need women who are more willing to submit to their husbands. That wasn't his whole shtick by any means, but that was part of it. And for folks who are struggling, for young men who say, wait, this world isn't the world I want. This isn't what I thought I was going to get. That can be a very appealing message, especially when the Democratic Party is saying to you, well, just work harder. Just, we'll write off $10,000 of your debt. You might have a couple $100,000. You might be looking at a couple $100,000 of debt. Well, we'll write off the first $10,000. That's not going to get you where you need to go. So Kirk gave answers to, he showed. He said he didn't believe in empathy, right? He didn't. But you know what? He did show empathy. He didn't believe in empathy for homeless people. He didn't believe in empathy for, I guess, lefties. He certainly didn't believe in empathy for the Palestinian people because he didn't even believe there were Palestinian people. But he showed, I believe, empathy for the predominantly, not exclusively, predominantly white male audience at college campuses that came to see him. They sensed that he understood that they were facing real challenges, that his answers were bad ones. They weren't going to make society a better place, but he did speak to the challenges that they faced. And that made him beloved among that group. And by the way, I don't want to say just men, women too. Especially religious, right? Because he often invoked Christianity. He often invoked the Bible. Now, I was talking to a neighbor about this who says, hey, I'm a cafeteria Catholic. We were talking about various teachings, right? And they're very progressive, very liberal, but there's a lot of incredibly liberal, left-wing, socialist teachings in Catholicism, right? I mean, if you're religious, it doesn't matter what religion you are. You're a cafeteria Christian, you're a cafeteria Jew, you're a cafeteria Muslim. It doesn't matter. You're going to pick and choose what you like in your religion, and you're going to throw out what you don't. That's what people do. So if you're raised, and I think for Kirk, he said he was a Christian. I'm sure he went to church. I don't know. Maybe he didn't. I would assume he did. You're raised in the church. You're raised in a Protestant or evangelical Protestant home, or a relatively devout Catholic home, or Jewish. And there are certain immutable truths that you're raised to believe in. And Kirk empathized with those. He shared those views. He didn't just empathize. He didn't just put himself in your shoes. You were one with him on that. The left in this country, Democrats anyway, have failed miserably to reach out to that cohort and speak to them from the left in persuasive terms. You don't have to embrace the culture wars from their standpoint, whether it's women submitting to their husbands or the homophobia that tragically is in much of these religions. You don't have to embrace that. You can talk about turning the other cheek. You can talk about treat thy neighbor as thyself. You can talk about welcoming the stranger into your home. Those are all just as much part of religious traditions as some of the more angry, ideas that come from them. Now, that said, you're not going to persuade everyone. You'll never win over everyone, but you can try. You can use what you have at your disposal. But Democrats didn't do that. Why? Because they didn't really believe it either. They don't really believe in treating thy neighbor as yourself. That would mean going to the billionaire class and saying you got to pay people more money because you're not treating them the way you want to be treated. Right? It would mean we would have to bring good jobs back to this country because our neighbors are the people who live within our borders. And we're saying, hey, we all should have a decent life. Democrats don't believe in that. Democrats don't believe in turning the other cheek. Their reaction to January 6th was vindictive, aggressive. Now, I think the people who were, went into the Capitol should have faced legal sanctions. They broke the law. But also, turning the other cheek would mean recognizing there was legitimate anger, that Congress hasn't responded. The Democratic Party hasn't responded to the needs of the people. Democrats don't do that. So, Kirk tapped in to a religiosity that Democrats have completely forsaken, ignored to a significant degree, especially by forgetting about or refusing to discuss some of the real beautiful aspects of religion. And I mentioned, but again, love thy neighbor as thyself. The truth, will set you free, right? That we must be truth seekers. Rich man, what was it? The camel will go through an eye of a needle easier than a rich man. Something like that. I can't remember. There's something about a camel and a needle. I don't know. I had some clips here, but you know what? I don't even want to play them. This is not even anger at Kirk. It really isn't. I mean, there are some Kirks in there Kirk clips that I think are pretty damn good. Well, or at least let me say it differently. Let me play one because I'll just play this one. I'm not going to go after. He and this student seem to come to a rapport, and I kind of understand it. This is not going to be like when I'm trying to demonize Kirk. I'm going to play it for you, and I'm going to tell you why I think this touched people, and why also it's inadequate. It's simply inadequate. So let's get this up here. They're going to talk about, what he calls DEI. Let's play it.
I overheard you saying about how the NBA is 75% black, and which is, it's true, but the NBA built a dream team over the Olympics, and they almost lost to a whole bunch of non-black players. What do you think about that?
They did still win.
They did.
So let me explain this to you on DEI. So DEI is this belief that we're going to force people in.
So I'm going to stop it there for a second. I don't like that. Let me explain this to you. So condescending. I personally have a huge problem with that. I try. I'm sure I fail. When I talk to people, I try not to be condescending. I don't like it when they're condescending to me. I had an argument with a former guest on this program about, I bring this up, a lot, this topic, but about trans athletes. And they said to me, because I acknowledge I was wrong about one of my facts. I thought that, especially at that time, that trans athletes had more success against girls than they had. And as far as we could tell, they have not had as much success as I had thought they had had. And I acknowledged, I said, yeah, I was wrong on my facts. And they said, well, you're learning, and I was like, F you. Don't condescend to me. Don't explain. We're having a conversation. If I'm learning from you, fine. But you're not the font of wisdom, just like I'm not. We're trying to understand each other. And I think when people say things like, well, let me explain this to you, it's very condescending and it's a turnoff. I'm not sure. I don't know whether his audience liked it. Like we're explaining to the black guy or the liberal or something. I don't know. I don't want to go there. I'm just telling you, for me, I found that an off-putting remark.
The win.
They did.
So let me explain this to you on DEI. So DEI is this belief that we're going to force people in positions,
right,
a quota.
Right.
So just the NBA is a great example. So right now the NBA is 75% black. Mm-hmm. If all of a sudden the NBA said, we want more diversity, it's too black.
Yeah.
Right? Because we want to have more diversity.
Right.
And they would say, we're not allowed to have any more than 30% of the NBA be black. Mm-hmm. Would the quality of the NBA go down?
The quality of the NBA, arguably right now, yeah, it would. But
let's take the NFL, right? Yeah. So half.
Right. So he makes his point. I mean, we don't have to hear about the football, right? I mean, sports are a meritocracy. Clearly, the best players are the ones who are in that pros. Then he tries to, Kirk, segue that to colleges and, I guess, professions. So here we go.
Qualified white people that would then get positions in the NFL, and the quality of play would slip.
Right.
So you get the argument.
Yeah.
You then extrapolate that to other walks of life.
Right.
You think to yourself, let's just hire the best.
Yeah.
And the NFL does hire the best.
It should be the best no matter what the thing
Skin
is.
color.
Like, but I don't think there should be restrictions to anybody. As long as you're good at what you do, it doesn't really matter to me.
I agree.
All right. So it sounds good, right? Like he and this man come to an agreement. But the agreement is based on a framing by Kirk that is not accurate. And he fails ultimately to acknowledge that there's a real problem that DEI is designed to address, or that the alleged function of DEI is to address. Now, I'm not saying it's the right solution, but Kirk acts like there's no problem at all. So the problem is that we have a paucity of African Americans at the top in any field, really in any non-athletic fields, and maybe music, right, and entertainment. There just aren't a lot of black leaders in finance, in business, in law, in academia. There are some, but they're not many. That's a big, big problem for society. And DEI is supposed to address it. Now, certain aspects of DEI, I agree with Kirk, and I can see why people would be resentful, right? So where you have different standards. If you're a member of one group, the standards are different than if you're another. So Asians, understandably, don't like the fact that because they're a member of that group, they need to get higher scores to get into a certain school, to get into the top universities. And whites, even they don't need to get as high scores as Asians. So that's understandably going to cause resentment, anger. You want to believe, we all should believe, we all view our institutions of higher learning as meritocratic. You get in based on what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you've achieved. And quotas or affirmative action does fly in the face of that. It's understandable that people would resent it. On the other hand, there's still a problem. And if you don't use affirmative action or quotas, you still have a real problem. The real problem that they're designed to address. Now, DEI doesn't just mean you put a thumb on the scale of applicants who are Native American, Black, Latino. That's not necessarily what DEI. It also means outreach. It means we go into areas where we may not have found candidates that we haven't looked. It means we are willing to consider people from backgrounds that maybe previously were out of bounds. Now, there has to be a balance. I get it. But Kirk just completely ignores the reality that our society is profoundly unequal and that at the bottom, using various metrics, are Black people, Native Americans, and to a somewhat lesser degree, Latinos. He ignores that reality. It's not part, or he doesn't care. So there's a problem. I agree with his criticism of DEI. He found an area where there's a legitimate argument against it. But if you're going to argue against it, then you have to come up with other solutions to a real world problem. And he doesn't do that. He would say, well, I just tell people they need to work harder. It's in the end, it's a zero-sum game. If all the wealth and or 95% of the wealth is going to the top 1%, top 10%, and they're just crumbs at the bottom, it doesn't matter how hard you work. You personally might climb out, but you're going to leave behind plenty of people. And their lives are going to suck, and it's not right. And Kirk doesn't address that. I don't have the video. I'm not going to play the video of him where he denies that Palestine is a real place. I mean, I don't, at some point, what I look for, what I try to do here is bring people together. And for the problem of not making it to the top, not being a corporate titan or what have you, I have solutions to that. And, I talk about those solutions. And I think they're the right solutions, which is you reduce greatly the influence and power of the corporate titan, of individuals. You have an aggressive antitrust division that breaks integrated companies up into constituent parts so that there are many more CEOs, right? If you have more companies, if Amazon, instead of just one giant company, was like 15 or 20, you could make it 50 companies. Then you'd have 50 CEOs instead of just one. So there would automatically be more diversity among CEOs if you did that. It also wouldn't be quite as great to be a CEO. Still be good, but you wouldn't be worth, you wouldn't be a centibillionaire. I mean, did Larry Ellison from Oracle just break 200 billion? I think he did. So the desire, the need, the drive to be that one person at the top would be reduced, because there wouldn't just be one person. There'd be a lot of people. So that's one thing. You bring up the bottom, so you bring up the floor very, very much higher, and you reduce how much higher the ceiling is than the floor. You do those things. You improve our public schools. You don't go with these religious-based institutions and charter schools. You say every single kid is going to get a good education, and we know how to do that. We protect, one of the arguments I think the right would have is schools aren't always safe. We don't protect kids from other kids. We need to do that. But the answer isn't the right's answer, which is, let's have more private schools. Let's have charter schools. No, the answer is you have more teachers. You pay for more teachers. You pay for more staff. You pay for smaller classrooms. Those are my solutions. I see these problems and I want to solve them. I don't think Charlie Kirk cares about those solutions. I think Charlie Kirk, I don't think he cared. He's dead now, but I don't see that he cared. He had empathy for one group, but that empathy could not extend beyond that group. And that's why I have a lot of anger. That's why I'm not happy with him. That's why I posted critically of him, because I think he used gifts. Those gifts didn't move me, but he used gifts, GIFTSs, to maintain a profoundly wrong status quo. And he profited from doing that to a tremendous degree. I have a huge problem with that. That's why I was critical. That's why I continue to be critical of Kirk. Doesn't mean I think he should be shot. Of course I don't. I think it was wrong. The person who killed him should absolutely be prosecuted. No question about it. Okay, it's just after 1. I've been on for an hour, but I want to just talk about this story before I go. It is the free-for-all. I'll be back Monday, by the way. Looking forward to it. Just this story by Kamala Harris came out in Politico. She has a book out. And my wife was saying to me, she just thinks this is, hey, why are we talking about, why are we regurgitating this? Do we need to? And my answer is, I think we should regurgitate the Harris campaign, the Harris-Walz campaign. I think there are lessons to be learned. But sadly, Kamala Harris didn't learn those lessons, at least not the ones I think she should have learned. I'm going to go through this because she paints herself, and we hear this so much. And to me, this is such a horrible use of the word victim, that she was somehow the victim of the Biden team that didn't want her to succeed, that put her in difficult situations. You're not a victim. You're the vice president of the United States. You were tapped to be Veep, even though you got zero votes, zero primary votes. I guess, what do they call them? Electoral? I don't know in the primaries. I mean, I guess there were some primaries. She must have gotten votes. She got votes, but she got no votes towards the nomination. You were not the people's choice to be vice president. And you got to be vice president. You were tapped not by the American people, not through a competitive primary season to run for president in 2024, to be the standard bearer of the Democrat. You were tapped by Joe Biden. And reluctantly, the Democratic big shots, Barack Obama, who apparently never really warmed up to you, from what I've heard, who knows if that's true, Nancy Pelosi, they may not have thought you were the best choice, but they went along with it. You were no victim, Kamala Harris. You were in an incredibly fortunate position. And rather than take advantage of it, rather than exploit that position that you didn't deserve to be in the first place, you blew it. And that you call yourself a victim is incredibly frustrating, because there are lessons you could learn if you could say, hey, these are things that I could have done differently and that Democrats need to do differently. And if you had done that, if you did that in your memoir or your book or whatever we want to call it, if you did that, if you said, these are the things that we could have and should have done differently, then maybe going forward, your party would have a better chance to prevail. But what you really did is you just point the finger at Biden. You say we should have pushed him out early. Well, obviously, we all know that. We all know that this 83, 84-year-old demented man shouldn't have been running for president. And yes, the party made a terrible mistake in promoting his candidacy long past the time when it was clear he was not up for the job. But then explain to us why. Why do you think the party did it? Why did the party want Joe Biden so badly to be the nominee in 24 when it was clear he couldn't run? He wasn't going to be up for the job. Why? So she says basically they decided I should be knocked down a little more. So for her, it's all personal. The Biden team didn't like her. So they tried to humiliate her. They tried to embarrass her. That's what this is all about. And we heard this before. She was put in charge of immigration, which was a lose-lose. Yeah, immigration is a tough one. I get it. But, you're from a border state, California. Presumably, you could have talked to experts. You could have come up with some meaningful solutions, hopefully presented them, come out with some kind of a report on what to do. Path to citizenship, push it aggressively. Go to the Democrats, say, this is what we need to do. Could have done all that. You didn't, as far as I know, you didn't do it. Harris's criticism, and I understand the party makes it really tough. The party's controlled by the donor class, by the billionaire class. It's a corporatist party. I get all that. Could have pushed back a little bit. Could have pushed against it. You didn't. Harris's criticism of Biden's decision-making and sharp critiques for the advisors that surrounded him. Okay, that's fair. Laid bare frustrations that the Biden White House had dismissed and downplayed during his term. And Harris felt Harris felt sidelined. Well, aren't vice presidents always sidelined? Wasn't Joe Biden sidelined under Obama? I don't know that anyone was more sidelined, seriously, than Mike Pence under Trump in the first term. Now, I think he's probably given Vance some stuff. I don't really know. I haven't really followed it. But vice presidents are always sidelined. John Nance Garner said it wasn't worth a bucket of warm spit. Is that the word? That's what they say, but maybe it was with an H instead of a P. I don't really know. That's what the vice presidency is worth. There was a sitcom with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, was a big hit on HBO called Veep, just making fun of the idea of how Veeps are. It's like a nothing position, right? Even though you're one heartbeat away from the presidency. So, yeah, you were sidelined like every other vice president before you. She wrote that Biden staff saddled her with difficult policy items. You're the vice president. Can't you handle difficult policy items? And she claims they castigated her after delivering a speech that went viral. And they showed little interest in defending her against attacks from Republicans and conservative leading media. Okay, so those are an interesting list, and I want to go through some of it. Now, I said some of it already talked about. You got a hard assignment. Come on. Put on your big girl pants and take charge. Deal with it. But she does point out in her book that at one point, at one moment, she seemed to gain some traction with voters. She called for Israel to allow more aid into Gaza. And I remember sort of when she did that, people liked it for once. By the way, from Zaina. By the way, good to see you, Zaina. She was a presidential candidate. She could have easily changed and modified policies. Yes, of course. So when Harris called for Israel to allow more aid into Gaza, she was castigated for apparently delivering it too well. Okay, so here's what you learned, Harris. When you spoke in support of Palestine, when you spoke against Israel, the people responded. They said, yes, that's what we want to hear. We agree with you. So I think she said something like there should be aid or something. Zaina's saying, no, she didn't. I don't know if she was talking about that specific speech. I know there was people read into it more than was said, right? They saw her saying something that she didn't say. But I think she did say something about, we see the pictures and they're horrible or something of that sort. Okay, so you got the message in any event. You said it in your book, whether you did or didn't give the speech that whether you did or didn't call for more aid for Gazans. You claim in your book you did, and that people responded to that claim. So how come when you were the nominee, you didn't talk about the cruelty that Israel was inflicting, the cruelness or the cruelty of the Israeli occupation? Why didn't you call it a genocide, which is what the American public are seeing is happening? You wanted to win. Instead of pointing the fingers at others, why didn't you run with that information you gleaned, which is that the one time in your book when you say, yeah, people really responded, I was when I called out Israel, was when I spoke of the humanity of the Palestinian people. So why didn't you use that to your advantage? You did just the opposite. You said you weren't going to do anything differently. You weren't going to condition aid to Israel on a ceasefire, on stopping the killing. You weren't going to do any of that. Gee, I wonder who's to blame for your loss. I wonder who we should point the finger at. I don't think it's a tough one. It says how she really didn't speak against Israel and in support of Palestine. She said more aid should be led in. Yeah, well, even that statement alone, and that's my recollection as well, even that statement alone got some positive response. But she never really took advantage of that. It's her fault she lost. It's her fault. It's the Democratic Party's fault. And frankly, well, I think it's fair to say it's AOC's fault. It's the fault of the left of the Democratic Party that just simply backed her without demanding concessions, because the concessions that they would have demanded would have made her more popular, would have made her more likely to win. But she didn't. And now we have Trump. And I mean, I guess you can argue, and I guess he's even worse. It's a pretty low bar she set, but he managed to crawl under it. Zaina, great to see you. Music, thank you for your wonderful comments. Ari, also. I will be back Monday. Thank you all for being part of Halitics, and enjoy your afternoon.